There is still no relief from tariffs after Prime Minister Mark Carney visited the White House this week. But are Carney and President Donald Trump closer to a deal? Here's a quick recap of their meeting.
We'll spend some time and we'll make some deals and we'll do some things that are good for both of our countries. We have natural conflict. We also have mutual love. You know, we have great love for each other.
There are areas, as the President just said, where conflict, maybe not so much conflict, we compete. There are areas where we compete, and it's in those areas where we have to come to an agreement.
The problem we have is that they want a car company and I want a car company. In other countries, they're very far away, and there's no problem. You can compete and you can do. We don't like to compete because we sort of hurt each other when we compete. We want Canada to do great, but you know, there's a point at which we also want the same business.
Will Mr. Carney be leaving Washington with a deal on tariffs?
I think they're going to be very happy. I think the people of Canada, they will love us again. He's a good man. He does a great job, and he's a tough negotiator.
So then what's holding things up? If he's a great man and you want to do a deal with Canada, why aren't you?
Because I want to be a great man, too.
A jovial moment in a very high-stakes meeting, but patience appears to be wearing thin among some of the country's premiers after Canada made concessions.
We can't just keep rolling over to President Trump. As he strengthens his case, we seem to be weakening our case. Maybe Prime Minister Carney knows something I don't know. And if that's the case, he should sit down with the premiers and explain that.
What did we get for those concessions that we made as a country to the U.S.? You mentioned a few points there, like did we then see them back off any tariffs as a result? I'm not aware of any.
Time now to bring in our party insiders. Greg McEachran is a former Liberal ministerial advisor. Here with me in studio, Fred Delory is a former Conservative campaign manager, and Melanie Richer is a former communications director for the NDP. Hi guys, nice to see you all. Greg, I'll start with you. How do you think the Prime Minister did this week in Washington? He was quite complimentary of the President at some points during that Oval Office sit-down, but there's still no deal. What did you take away from that trip?
Well, it really depends on the lens that you looked at it through. I mean, if you're Pierre Poilievre, it was probably a colossal failure. I haven't bothered to check, but I'm probably assuming that I'm correct there. If you compare it, though, to the previous visit, it was excellent. If you compare it to some of the other world leaders who have gone to the Oval Office, it was excellent. But there was a moment, I think Anne McGrath was on a panel earlier this week and she used the cringe word. And if I'm looking at it, from the point of view of a proud Canadian or as a supporter of the Liberal Party, there is a cringe factor there as well. But I'm also mindful that at some point, whether it's true or not, the fact that Trudeau got under the president's skin was used against him by, the opposition parties. So, it's a tough audience to negotiate, broadly, but the big one in the Oval Office is a really tough one. I will say this though, JP, one of the big problems though is one of the lenses that you have to look at this through is the spin that came out last week. So Mel and Fred and I were about to go on air when, there was some word that there was going to be a deal on steel. And I think, the folks at the center need to take a look at whether or not they helped that trip and the view of that trip by raising expectations unnecessarily. I think overall, in terms of, take the cringe factor away, it was a good meeting and things continue to move forward. And, things didn't blow up as we've seen that have happened with other leaders. But, you have to be very careful when your own people are setting expectations. There's a lot of value attributed to that. There's a lot of expectations, that you are giving us. And something went awry there.
Yeah, Fred, on the cringe factor, he called Trump a transformative president. He kind of rhymed off all the peace deals he's signed, right, to resolve some of the conflicts that have been brewing. Mark Carney, that is, trying to get in his good book. And I think that it was interesting that Alberta Premier Danielle Smith was one of the few people, frankly, that came to the Prime Minister's defense on that issue in particular, saying, Carney is now speaking Trump's love language. He wants to hear this sort of thing, and she thinks that's how we actually get to a deal, not the kind of combative Justin Trudeau style, like taking him on, correcting everything he says that's wrong, whatever it might be, but just kind of buttering him up a little bit. Do you think that there is something to be said for that strategy?
Absolutely. It looks like a brewing bromance here between the Prime Minister and the President. That's not a bad thing for our country to have when in terms of a strong relationship with our, love it or not, strongest trading partner that our economy so depends on. It's a lot of work that Carney will have to do here and is doing. This was, by all accounts, looks like a very positive meeting, which we needed one after a year of uncertainty and not knowing where it's going. Now, to that point, nothing's been settled yet. There's still lots to be played out here. And it has to play out, and has to play out soon-ish. There needs to be an end game at some point where we get a deal. Is that going to be by Christmas? Is it going to be by spring? It keeps getting pushed around. There's no real time frame or real structure, it appears, to this. Something has to happen, and that's the risk Carney has, is if it doesn't happen, if this continues to go. If he doesn't get something nailed down at some point, and if our economy is really felt by people at some point, this trade war, it's going to hurt him.
Yeah, Melanie, what do you make of this? Let's get to that in a sec, but what do you make of this whole complementary style that he seems to be deploying, right? It's not really the elbows up sort of mentality, right, that he wanted us to follow during the election campaign, sort of that rhetoric of we need to take on the United States, the relationship will never be the same as it was, more aggressive than he is now when he's sitting next to him in the Oval Office, calling him a transformative president, and he's done so much great work on the Middle East and Russia and what have you. I mean, do you think that there's a risk politically? Because a big part of his base, the liberal base, wanted him to be aggressive with Trump and the United States, right?
Totally. I'm a little bit of two minds. I think it is reasonable to, hope that they're able to have a better relationship, and there may be a little maneuvering there on the Prime Minister's behalf to do that. But that only works if you come back and you've got something positive to say. If you come back and you've got a deal, if you come back and the tariffs are lifted or lowered or something, and none of that has happened. And I think, unfortunately, it's just bad communications when you just seem like you're developing a bromance with President Trump when the majority of Canadians do not quite like the president, and they definitely don't like what the president has done. What Premier Ford and Premier Canoe have said is really close to I'm going to call them reasonable people in my life who don't consider themselves partisan, who voted for Mark Carney because they believed in what Mark Carney had to say. And when they saw the clip that you played off the top where Mark Carney, claps his hands and laughs, they were horrified. And I don't say horrified lightly. They were like, oh, that, I did not like that. So I think if you are going down there, you're developing a relationship, those are all important things. But if you're not coming back and saying something, if you're not coming back with a benefit, to Premier Canoe's point, we've removed tariffs, we're doing all these things. The Prime Minister keeps going down there to visit the President. We've got to see something. And the longer it takes for us to see something, I think people are going to start losing hope. And I think they're going to start losing patience with the Prime Minister and what he's doing with the President.
Yeah, Greg, I think, the Prime Minister is trying to keep Trump on side, right? If I'm to interpret his actions, he doesn't want to peeve off the guy who's in charge of buying, or, at least part of buying $400 billion worth of goods from this country every year, right? We don't want to have such a sour relationship that the economy is even more challenged by potentially more aggressive action from Trump on tariffs and what have you. So I think he's trying to smooth things over there. But there certainly is a political risk to all of this for Mark Carney and the Liberals, isn't there? If he is playing nice, if he is buttering him up, if he is giving him what he wants to hear, and then not producing a trade agreement, right? And not coming back, spending, as to your point earlier, kind of telegraphing there might be a deal on steel and aluminum, not delivering that. Dominic LeBlanc stays down for a few days. He comes back. We don't have any word of a deal yet. I mean, at some point, the public, the voting public, starts to lose patience with some of this, don't you think?
Well, I mean, that is the political risk. But, between my earlier comments and Mel's, we've kind of laid out the political risk here, which is, look, I'm glad I'm not, part of the, I'm not working for, Minister Joly or Minister LeBlanc, because this is really tough. Some of the stuff that, it's not just the things that Donald Trump has said about Canada, it's the other things that he's doing right now. We're not blind to it. Whether it's ICE or just, push-up challenges, just ridiculous things that, as somebody, I'm a bit Pollyanna here. I really like politics. I really want Canadians to be engaged in. I want people to feel that they can work, in public service. And I think, the damage that someone like Trump does overall is huge for people who decide to leave government or never enter government. So the balance is, he could tick Trump off and make a lot of people really happy and have a great soundbite. But where does that leave, our businesses, our employees, our economy? And so that's the big challenge. And I think, the Prime Minister wanted this job. I think he's the right person for this job. And it's a tough job. I would not want to have to sit there and have to nod along. And look, full marks to Prime Minister Carney, because it's deftly handled. Transformative is a very key word. And I grew up in a big family. I used to hate passive aggressiveness. I'm starting to have an appreciation for it now.
Yeah, it's actually quite a clever word to use. Fred, what do you make of Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre's criticisms of this whole thing? He was using some of the most heated rhetoric I've heard from him in a while, actually, saying that Carney's whole campaign was a fraud. He's a fraud. He's selling us down the river, essentially. But then what's interesting is when he's asked, okay, well, what would you do different? What would you do different than Mark Carney? His answer is maybe a little underwhelming because it's essentially what they're already doing, right? He says we should increase military spending. We should unlock our natural resources. That's how we'll position ourselves best against Trump. Those two things, which is what he raised this week, kind of Mark Carney's doing that, right? Like, that's his strategy too. Arguably, Poilievre would probably go further with pipelines and what have you.
Right.
But it just shows that it's a tough thing to navigate, right? Nobody has the silver bullet for Trump.
Leader of the opposition, many have said, and I'll say again tonight, is one of the hardest jobs to have in politics in Canada. You're not in charge of anything, but you're asked to present ideas to everything. So it is an immense challenge, and on this particular issue, I don't think Poilievre is getting the right approach down in his challenges to Carney on this. In particular, getting a deal with Trump and what he was saying this week just doesn't fit, and it's great risk that if Carney gets a deal, and if it's a good deal, I think it'll really lessen the any impact Poilievre can have on this. Now, it could go the other way. Maybe there is no deal, or maybe this all blows up and goes terribly, and Poilievre could say, look, I was right all along on this. But as a Canadian, obviously, we want to see a deal get done. So I think Canadians are, at their core, rooting for this to work, rooting for this relationship to work. We want to see that happen. So I would, if I was advising these folks, I would be trying to pick different angles to go on and look for that long-term win, not the short-term clip for this week that isn't going to impact anyone in a positive way for you.
Yeah. Okay, let's just shift focus a little bit here and dig into the debate over the pipeline from Alberta to BC. We heard a little bit from David Eby and Danielle Smith this week. Have a listen.
Right now, the province of BC, the Premier of BC, is not a threat to the pipeline project of the Premier of Alberta because there is no pipeline project.
Well, I think Premier B's comments are un-Canadian and they're unconstitutional. We have to decide if we're going to operate like a country and trade with each other and tear down internal trade barriers, stop blocking each other's projects.
It's not the Danielle Smith show, it's the Canadian team.
Mel, what do you make of this? It's getting a little heated, eh? It's getting quite personal, too. Like, they're using personal terms to disparage one another.
Yeah, I didn't love those clips, and for a few reasons. I think it is incredibly rich to hear Premier Smith talk about, Team Canada and how we need to reduce barriers and we all need to work together, when she spent the last 8, 9, however many months doing the opposite of that since Trump has been elected, and really being the only outlier from the other premiers as a means to working together and advancing stuff together. So I think it's a bit rich. It's un-Canadian, it's unconstitutional. I find that such inflamed language that is so unnecessary and so you're trying to divide people instead of trying to find a solution forward, which I find is just dangerous language to begin with. I don't know that Premier Eby, while I have a lot of respect for Premier Eby, I don't know that he helped himself there with the emotion or the passion in his voice. Obviously, he feels like he's probably in a bit of a corner, but. Again, we talked about this a little bit last week. His point about there is no pipeline in front of us right now. So what is it that we're talking about? And the problem with this is but the country has tried to build pipelines for a few years now, and we have not been able to do that. And we've not been able to do that because we've been unable to properly consult First Nations, to properly consult local communities, and to get them to agree that this is something that's good for their communities. So until that work is done, you're not going to get any forward. And in fact, a lot of the conversations that we've had as of late, or some of the things that have been put into the conversation, is removing some of the legislation that's in place to have proper conversations, to have proper consultations with First Nations. So removing those barriers is not going to make any of those challenges, those constitutional challenges, any easier. Yeah. So this whole back and forth seems like a lot of drama for not an actual thing that we're talking about, which is a little bit too bad in the context, because there is a lot of stuff that we could be doing, provinces together, to make life easier for people right now as we're faced with everything coming from Donald Trump.
Greg?
Yeah, I mean, when Premier Eby, whether you agree with him on everything or not, and there's lots I disagree with him on, but when he says when he says that there's no company behind this, he's absolutely correct at the moment, and that's not un-Canadian to point that out. And I remember earlier this year when Premier Smith, did an interview with Steve Bannon, that to me seemed a bit more, if you're going to start tossing around the term un-Canadian, that seemed a lot more to Mel's earlier point. She has not been the premier that you would point to right away, when you would look at who's on Team Canada. So she is talking about a $14 million project to do an application around this, and that's a lot different. And she raised, we were talking in the last round about raising expectations. She raised a lot of expectations. She hinted that she was going to have a proponent come forward, and that's not the case here. And I do think, last week on the show, Minister Dix said it was a distraction. I agree with that. I think she is absolutely focused on pipelines, don't get me wrong, but I think this $14 million, 6-month project to come up with a proposal is a bit of a distraction, from the same premier that's had a lot of, self-inflicted things like, her executive director talking about, spanking, a 17-year-old. What's also lost in this is that oil production in Canada is actually doing really well. 2024 was a record year. 2025 is. I mean, in Newfoundland in May, it was up, I think, May 25 over 24 was up 26%. I think July was up 11%. Overall, the oil sands are doing really well this year. Oil production in Canada is doing really well, but from this debate, you might not know that.
And the Trans Mountain Pipeline, the expansion, is gushing cash. They're making a lot of money on that thing. I know we had to pay a lot to build it, but it is making a hefty profit right now, in part because we're able to get world prices for our oil for the first time in a long time. Fred, I want you to weigh in on this, but let's just listen to a little bit of tape from Tim Hodgson. He is the federal energy minister. He was before the Senate last night, and he had something interesting to say. Let's play it.
What we have said is to build, you need support of the jurisdiction you build through, and you need the support of First Nations. The proponent, in this case, the province of Alberta, needs to attract that if they want to build. That's something between the province of Alberta and the province of British Columbia. We've said we will be a constructive participant in that three-way discussion. The province of Alberta has some work to do.
So he seems to be lining up behind the BC argument, right? Saying that Alberta, you got to get BC on side, or we, the feds, we're not going to approve any interprovincial pipeline. Right. What do you make of that?
It's so difficult to get things built in this country for a wide range of reasons. Pipelines, this is an NDP government that is fundamentally opposed to a pipeline. It comes down to ideology. The Conservative government of Alberta is pro-pipeline. They want to get their product to market. It's going to be such a challenge to get this done. And we talk about, everyone's mentioned no proponent. No proponent's going to step up and try to invest in this climate. That's one of the issues we have here and why it's so hard to get things built. Proponents, especially for the last 10 years, where oil and gas were dirty words that people were using, and here in Ottawa especially, it was pushed down so hard in so many ways. So it's going to be a challenge to ever get this built. Keystone worked its way back into our headlines this week, which is interesting to see. That's sending something down south. That's not diversifying our markets if we were doing that. That's not getting us to other places. So that's going to be an interesting development and how that plays out. But this is going to be such a challenge for anyone to get done. If the NDP, if they're in government in BC, I could see them always putting up that thing. Governments do change though.
And the BC NDP, they're against an oil pipeline, but not necessarily an LNG pipeline, right? Natural gas carrying that sort of product to LNG export facilities that they're on side with. But when it comes to oil, it's a no for them, at least for now. So it's kind of interesting. They're picking and choosing a little bit because I guess it's obviously a different product. If there's a spill with natural gas, it's not quite the same thing as oil. There's a variety of reasons as to why you might be on side, but there is a little bit of self-interest there as well.
But again, how much of a hard time did the BC government have with LNG, right? Yeah. There was massive blowback. There was so much work that had to be done on the ground with local communities to get that even started. So they know, very directly how hard it is to make sure that projects that are proposed have buy-in from local First Nations and local communities. So I think it's maybe not just ideological, but it's also some of the commitments that they've made to the people that they represent.
It's interesting, though, that Tim Hodgson is kind of lining up behind BC, though. Like, this is going to be a problem now for Carney because he's going to have Danielle Smith at him again for something different this time, but she's going to be pressuring him, and she says if there is not a deal on this hypothetical pipeline to Northwest BC, it shows that Canada doesn't work. Like, this is a real political hot potato for Carney.
But I think he's lining up with Premier Eby because it is a hypothetical pipeline, right? Like, until not just what he said was that she needs to work with BC. He talked about how she needs to work with First Nations and how she needs to work with local community, and she needs to find a proponent. So until those things happen, then we'll talk. Maybe it changes if those things are happening or processes are put in place. But to Greg's point earlier of this big announcement that didn't really seem to have anything to back it up, we're not really seeing any of that work happen.
Okay, let's pivot. In a few weeks, Prime Minister Mark Carney will table his first budget, and today he offered a sneak peek.
And this is our economic plan to meet this hinge moment in Canada's history. It's our plan for change, our plan to build Canada strong. The budget will set out what we will build. We'll also set out how we will build. In the budget, we'll have to make responsible and pragmatic choices. We will also take pragmatic decisions so we can protect the programs and initiatives that support the most vulnerable in our society.
The Liberals will need one party to support the budget in order for it to pass. And this week we learned from the Toronto Star that the government is in talks with the NDP to boost their funding since they've lost official party status. But the Liberals say it has no relation to the budget and the NDP's support for it. Okay, let's bring back our panel. Greg, let's start with the announcement today. We don't necessarily have to get into the nitty-gritty of what the policy announcements were, but, automatic tax filing for low-income Canadians, making the school food program permanent, extending the Canada Strong Pass, which people were happy about this summer, discounted admission to parks, museums, and Via Rail and all that. What do you make of this idea of, telegraphing a little bit of what's to come in the budget? It seems to be out of the Trudeau playbook in a sense because they want to get credit for something, right? That might be buried in the budget when it comes to budget day itself. Do you think that it was smart for the Prime Minister to do something like this today?
Absolutely, because it's been a while since I can point to a budget that actually, in the days after continued to make news. And one of the things about the end of the Trudeau administration was they did do a lot of pre-budget announcements, and what kind of revealed is that the announcements, the policies themselves were incredibly popular, but it didn't really move the needle on the numbers for Prime Minister Trudeau. So there is a lesson there about better communications, and I think we started off our panel today talking about the need for better communications. JP, the other thing I think today kind of had a lot of political watchers in Ottawa doing was digging out copies of the platform and going through, and because there's some things that that have been talked about in the last few days that surprised some people that they shouldn't have, in terms of the accounting procedures around the budget. And then you mentioned about Parks Canada. It may seem like just an aside, but it also shows that the issue of affordability and that there's we're experiencing some tough times. If the tariffs continue, we may continue to see more, that the government hasn't forgotten that. And that Parks Canada initiative, from people I talked to anecdotally, that was a hugely popular initiative last summer.
Yeah, it was for me. I loved it. I got to a few national parks for free. Didn't have to cough up any cash for that. Fred, what do you make of this pre-announcement? But also, let's talk about how they're going to get this passed, because they have a conundrum, the government, a little bit, right? You have the Conservatives who are, I'm not sure, Pierre Poilievre this week was saying, I want to sit down with the Prime Minister before I make a commitment on whether I'm going to vote for the budget. And he said, if he takes on all of my ideas, then yeah, I'll consider it. The NDP, we haven't heard much from at this point about what they're going to do. The Bloc Québécois has telegraphed that no, probably not. They can't support this austerity budget. Where does the government go from here?
They have a challenge in their hands. They have to find one party to back them. The election was 7 months ago, and the NDP do not have official party status. They have no staff. They have no research budget. And a few weeks before the budget, now we're hearing there's discussions going on to actually give them some extra resources.
Coincidence, right?
What an amazing coincidence.
Yeah.
At the same time, if I was the NDP, I would definitely look to take that. I don't know what it does to the NDP if they support this budget, particularly if this is an austerity budget like we're hearing it may be. If it is, then they're really selling their soul here for a few jobs, short-term jobs potentially. I'm not sure if that's the long-term good approach for the New Democrats. At the same time, they don't have a leader. There's a leadership race going on. People will likely forget this budget even happened or who voted for it a week after it passes. Obviously, what the programs will have an impact on Canadians, but I just mean on who votes and who doesn't. So, we'll have to see what the NDP do on this. To what Greg's point, though, about the announcement today and these different pre-announcements, I do think there is absolute value if you have good stuff in there. Don't just put it all in on budget day when it gets lost. If you have good programs, it's like a campaign. You got to roll them out. You don't just put your whole platform out one day, though I did do that one campaign. You want to roll it out. It actually worked then. But
Mel, what are you hearing from the NDP? You're connected, tell me, pull back the curtain, let me know what's happening.
So I had heard conversations about potentially helping with a leader's budget or a research budget a while ago, although, timing, the budget was coming in the fall no matter what. I think the Liberals are quickly realizing that they don't have that much control in the House, and they definitely don't have control at most of committees, and they need to figure out who is willing to work with them, not necessarily support them, but who's willing to work on the things that they want to do that the NDP also wants to do. So I don't think I'm surprised it's taken this long, but I think it's smart to figure out how they can give the NDP more resources, because stuff like committee, stuff like the House, we know how much time those things take, and when you don't have a team to help with that, it makes it really difficult. As it relates to the NDP selling their soul, I'll just take a moment there, because the rumors that I've been hearing is that the Conservatives have been desperately begging the NDP to either support the budget or to, maintain their abstain from supporting the budget, because they know that they can't abstain from the budget.
That's interesting politics.
Yeah, I know it is. What my flippant comment when I heard about this was, don't do their hard work. Let them do the hard work.
Sorry, go. No, it's just we could be going, crazy as this sounds, we could be going into an election.
Oh, yeah.
Right? They need one of these parties to do it. If it's an austerity budget the NDP can't support, if the Bloc Québécois, you can just never trust them, you don't know what they're going to do. Conservatives cannot support this budget. Poilievre has a leadership review coming up in the end of January. He cannot support this budget. The other angle, the other thing that someone could do, if the NDP and the Bloc could sort of leave a few MPs at home and abstain. We have electronic voting now. You can vote on your phone. That's not acceptable. You have to vote. You cannot abstain on this. So someone is going to have to break on this.
Greg?
Or we're going to the polls.
Yeah,
Final word to you.
We should frame this, though. It's not a Liberal decision, technically. I'm going to my old Director of Parliamentary Affairs days. This is the Board of Internal Economy that will decide. And I'm not, the challenge with it is if the NDP get more money, the other parties will look for that too. And, as the old feller here on the panel, I remember in 2011, Liberals went to third place, NDP were official opposition. And there were lots of interesting things happen where Liberal MPs were forced to move offices across the hall or next door to an identical one just for the sake of moving, or there was measurements in the lobby, I'm told, about how much space people got. Sometimes, memories are a little longer than people anticipate.
All right, let's leave it there. Thank you so much to our Friday Political Pulse panel, Greg McEachran, Fred Delory, and Melanie Richer. Nice to see you all. Happy Thanksgiving.